I think it is going. Oh yeah, because that's the theme music, and that means only one thing. It's time for another edition of IMNSHOW, in my not so humble opinion. Whose not so humble opinion? Well, my not so humble opinion. I'm DP Knudten, as you probably know, and you can certainly read on screen. And I've been doing this as a way to present my not so humble opinion, but also other people's not so humble opinions about a wide variety of subjects. And tonight I'm actually doing another one of my Nonfiction Brand podcast live sessions with a special guest. And I got to tell you, I'm really excited about this guest because I've had to know about TikTok as a marketer for a long time, but I'm not necessarily a creator on TikTok because I haven't found the stuff I really want to talk about. And then in my feed one day was delivered this dude. Hold on a second. Let me get him on screen. Dan McClellan. And my mind was a little bit blown. Why? Because Dan is a biblical scholar and linguist who, in his own words, says, I received my PhD from the University of Exeter in 2020, where I wrote my doctoral dissertation under the supervision of Francesca Stavrakopoulos. I hope I got that right, or even close. My dissertation treats the concept of divine agency in the Hebrew Bible through the methodological lenses of cognitive linguistics and cognitive science of religion. More specifically, it interrogates the notion of communicable agency as represented by the Ark of the Covenant and the messenger of, you would say, Adonai. Mm-hmm. And I respect that, so I'm going to leave it there. And I will say this, you can read the entire 301-page dissertation in a PDF available online simply by going to hcommons.org/members/MAKLELAN. But if you just frankly look up Dan McClellan that you see on screen and dissertation, you're undoubtedly going to find it because this is blowing my mind. A biblical scholar has not only embraced social media, but is using it not to talk about what he ate for lunch or what his political bent is or anything like that. He's using it to really interface with whoever might be interested about linguistics, specifically linguistics in the Bible, specifically taking down misread or misunderstood or in your own words, negotiated understandings of specific Bible passages, stuff like that. And I want to stop talking, but I do want to kind of make it clear. I've talked about where Dan stands on this. Everybody in the audience, and I've been very quiet about this on this podcast, I'm a pastor's son. Consequently, I'm agnostic. I've organized religion lost me a long time ago for a lot of reasons. We are not here to talk about that. We're not here to litigate any of that. We're here to really go into why Dan is doing what he's doing and answer a really, really important question for me, which is, why does a PhD linguistics dude have merch? But first, Dan McClellan, welcome to the Nonfiction Brand podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. I appreciate your time and that introduction.
Well, it's all true, because that's one of the things that you've taught me, which is, dare I say, data is greater than dogma. And let me get viewers on the same page. How can we be on the same page? By literally taking a look at one of Dan's TikToks. So bear with me as I do a little magic here. This is a recent TikTok where Dan does one of his patented takedowns of someone who's not quite getting the linguistics correct when it comes to a biblical passage or a word or a phrase or something like that. So let's watch this in its entirety. It's 1 minute and 20 seconds.
The spiritual truth about alcohol that they don't want you to know.
All right, let's see it.
So what is this demonic substance? Well, alcohol is the Arabic word that it's derived. It means body-eating spirit.
So I see a lot of videos that are making claims about etymological origins, and overwhelmingly they are just wildly off base. So I want to share a resource with you that you can check on if you hear people making etymological claims. The easiest way to verify an etymology you may find online is to go to etymonline.com, the online etymology dictionary, enter your term, gives you different entries. Let's look at the first one, the noun. And we see this comes from an Arabic word, kohl, fine metallic powder used to darken the eyelids, from a verb that means to stain or to paint. There's the rest of the entry. If you're curious about sources for the claims that you're going to find in the online etymology dictionary, they do provide a full list, and as you can see, it is a very comprehensive list of works in a handful of different languages. So as you can see, this creator's claim is pure and utter nonsense, and hopefully now you are better equipped to interrogate similar claims that you find on the internet in the future.
Okay. That should blow your mind, because that is not someone doing a silly dance on TikTok. That's someone who's bringing the PhD level linguistics heat regarding specifics that are important to anyone who lives under a regime that is influenced by the Judeo-Christian foundation that everything we're supposed to be about is founded upon. If we don't know what that foundation actually is, that could be a bit of a problem. And that's why I love Dan McClellan, specifically his takedowns. This is only one of, I'm looking at your TikTok page right now, 1,260. You, at least the numbered ones, are 1,260 different TikTok videos, all dealing with very specific stuff. I got to go all the way back to number one. What made you get out there and think that a biblical scholar, a linguist who's got a scientific rigorous background training, where did you get the audacity to think that you had something to say worth sharing via TikTok?
Well, this is something that a lot of scholars in and around my fields have been trying to do for a while, just because most of the conventional wisdom that our society inherits regarding the Bible, regarding religion, is literally like a century or two old by the time it gets filtered down and starts to get into widespread circulation. And so scholars have been trying to find ways to package what's going on a lot closer to the cutting edge and get it out to the general public, but there have not been a lot of good media for doing that. I remember in 2009, I started up a blog, and we had this group of, we called ourselves bibliobloggers, that we were trying to write stuff out to be able to share it with a wider audience. And I and a number of friends were really engaged in trying to combat misinformation, particularly about new artifacts that were being announced that frequently were turning out to be forgeries. So in 2011, I was helped spread information about a discovery that was announced, these Jordan-led codices that turned out to be forgeries. And the world of biblioblogging did not get a lot of attention, but just not quite a decade later, we have a bunch of other social media channels that are available. And this one, TikTok, I thought it was just for videos of people dancing and for Korean kids disrupting U.S. presidential campaigns. And, you know, I was all fine with that. But I started seeing people sharing on Instagram and on Facebook videos that were addressing claims about the Bible and religion, and not in a particularly well-informed way. And so I thought I would just go check out what's going on over there, see who's in charge, see who's calling balls and strikes. And it was an interesting array of different approaches to these topics, but I didn't see anyone with the credentials who was addressing it from a purely as purely not objective, but kind of dispassionate outside perspective as possible. I saw people mainly arguing from the two different teams about different aspects of the Bible and religion. And I thought, this might be another avenue for trying to democratize access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, make it a little more accessible to the general public. And so the first video I published was actually precisely on the Jordan-led codices, because somebody had been sharing videos that had gotten a lot of attention about these 70 lead books that were supposed to be the earliest Christian texts ever. And I started looking for accounts that were sharing videos about the Bible and religion that were spreading misinformation, so I could confront them and say, here are the data. This is what this indicates. There are different ways to interpret this, but we've got kind of these boundaries here, and the claims being made in this, that, or the other video are well outside those boundaries, entirely conflict with the data. And to my surprise, it turns out there's a pretty hungry audience for that kind of content, for somebody who is equipped, who is trained, and who can try to stay in the lane of trying to call balls and strikes regarding the Bible and religion. And I've learned a lot about social media. I've learned a lot about what the appetites are like out there for this kind of stuff. And I've also learned a lot about where I need to get better at content creation. And you mentioned production values, that kind of thing as well. But it's been an interesting journey, and it's actually turned into now my full-time job. The opportunities out there have been quite surprising. And a lot of wonderful people out there are looking to support this kind of content creation. So I'm letting all my friends in the industry know, hey, we need more people who can address more stuff. I've got my specializations, and some of them are broader than others, but I can't cover everything, not by a long shot. There are a lot of people who have different experiences than me, different backgrounds, different specializations, and I think the more folks like me we can get out there, the better. And there are other folks in biblical scholarship and the academic study of religion who enjoy this kind of content, would like to be able to produce content for a more public-facing general audience, but have always felt kind of confined by the strictures of the academy to just kind of stay within your classroom and not overturn the apple cart. But as someone who did not have a full-time academic appointment when I started this up, I'm apple carts be damned. I'm happy to go out there and produce content that's going to reach the audience where they are. And it's been surprising, but folks enjoy seeing the comic book T-shirts. Folks enjoy some of the things that I've always said in my own academic field, and some of the things I came up with when I started making content. The "All Right, Let's See It" is something that a lot of folks really get a kick out of, and data over dogma is something that I came up with as I started making these videos. Kind of the motto of my channel. I was like, if there's a motto for my channel, it's that I put data over dogma. We're not here to see which team wins. We're just here to get the data out there and let people evaluate it for themselves.
Well, and again, this is not a podcast episode about religion, people. Don't worry about that. It's a podcast about nonfiction branding, what I call creating a completely true, completely you brand that you already are. And that's what Dan's doing. So everything he just said, take the word Bible out, take the word scholarship out, and insert whatever you're doing in there. And I don't care if it's metal anodization. If you're an expert in metal anodization, there is an audience out there. So let me ask you, audience members, whether you're watching the live stream or the podcast, listening to the podcast, knowing what you just heard about Dan, what do you think his viewership might be on a given TikTok video? In the hundreds? In the thousands? In the tens of thousands? Be it bigger than that? It's in the latter two parts, which is in the tens of thousands and even above that. I mean, I'm looking quickly at your TikTok page and doing a quick average, and I'm going to say the average is about 50,000 views per video on average. Some are only about 10,000. I wish I had 10,000 on average. But some are 250,000. Some are beyond that even. And this is for what a lot of people would consider dry, dusty scholarship, except it's not. I mean, my daughters like to make fun of me because one of my daughters, who's in college now, said, "You know what, Dad, you really prepared me for college." And I said, "What? Why?" We always watched History Channel and Discovery Channel and just anything that was about the secrets of the Bible untold, or, or anything historical. And they would sit next to me, and I would under my breath be going, yeah, that's a load of crap. That's bull. Or no, but they buried the lead. They went for the sensational and didn't pay attention to the substantial. And that is what I think is key to the brand that is Dan McClellan. You want to focus away from the sensational and put it on the substantial. And by the way, people like me eat that up like protein, because it's nowhere else. Everything else is, ooh, Globeki Tepe. It's proving that mankind was raised by alien DNA,
Yeah.
all that crap. And you go, okay, it's doing what science does. It brings us new data. That data now has to be reinterpreted or interpreted into the existing data set. And it's creating fascinating stuff that may be sensational, but it starts with the substance. And that's what you do. And in that clip I showed you guys, he had 2 of his catchphrases in there. All right, let's see it. This is a typical Dan video. Aliens inhabiting the body of a woman in Pocatello, Idaho. And then cut to Dan. All right, let's see it. And then you go through and do a takedown. And I think respectful and dispassionate is exactly right. It's like, yeah, I'm going to call you a raging idiot who doesn't know squat, but I'm going to do it in such a way by showing the data that anyone who hears what I say is going to think you're an idiot who doesn't know squat. And that's a really powerful thing. And for people like me, it's like catnip. Where did you have that in mind, or did that develop over time? That kind of, you have a very specific recipe for your videos. You don't always adhere to it, but they kind of have a natural cadence, a natural tempo, a natural arc. Did that develop over time, or did you sit down and figure that out? How did that work?
That was definitely something I developed over time. I didn't have like a brand plan in place. In fact, the last thing I would have thought of for the first 5 or 6 months of being on TikTok was having a brand. But I did see that there was interest in, there were itches that needed scratching, and there was a way to present it that seemed to kind of create a template where people knew what they could expect, where people knew that it was going to be good. That's one of the comments I get all the time. When I hear, all right, let's see it, I know I'm in for a ride, or I know I'm in for a good time, or something like that. So it was something that I started to notice people were quoting these things back at me, and was like, oh no, I have a motto, I have a slogan, I have a catchphrase. And I started having people telling me, oh, you need to put this on a shirt. You need to put this on a sticker. You need to put this on a coffee mug. And I didn't take it seriously at first. But when I had a video probably less than a year into being on TikTok that got about 4.5 million views in about a day and a half. And, the follower count shoots up when that happens. And it made me a little nervous, because with every, if I gain 10,000 followers overnight, that's like 10,000 more eyes on me, and potentially more people, a larger pool from which someone may emerge who knows these issues better than me. So it was a little scary at first, but it also meant I was getting a lot more people telling me, you need a podcast, you need merch, this is your catchphrase. And so the audience kind of guided me into identifying the things that were catchy, that people were focusing on. People liked the data over dogma slogan for my channel, and that was one of the first things I put on a piece of merch. And yeah, if you told me when I started this up, you're going to be selling hoodies and T-shirts and things in a year, would not have believed you, not one iota. So it was really the audience that drove a lot of it. And I am kind of, through trial and error, I'm figuring out how to turn this into a brand. And I still have a lot of ways to go. There's still a ton that I don't know, but it's been It's been quite amazing. It's been quite a bit of fun. I've met some amazing people along the way as well who have been very helpful. A lot of YouTube folks, a lot of podcasters, a lot of others who've kind of been doing this for a while, biblical scholars who've been publishing for a popular audience, who've sold a lot of books written for popular audiences, have kind of sat me down and say, okay, here's some things to keep in mind. And so my hand has been held the entire way by the audience and by others who have a lot more experience than me doing this. So I'm really a product of this whole community, and have nobody but them to thank for the degree to which I am a brand right now. I've just basically brought my concern for trying to combat the spread of misinformation, and everyone else has molded me into whatever you see on the screen today.
Well, I'll take issue with what you were saying a little bit.
Okay.
They didn't mold you. You are already fully molded. What they're doing is polishing that which is already there. Because unless you are fronting it perfectly in such a way that I can't smell past your artifice, I don't get the feeling that anything you do in terms of your presentation is fake. I believe, do I think maybe you do a couple of takes, maybe on some of these to make it a little smoother? Probably. Do I think you maybe have bullet points figured out ahead of time? You don't just turn on the camera and blather? Yeah, absolutely. But do I think you're faking it? Do I think that you've got an agenda other than the one that you've published, which is, this is about going back to the data. And the whole thing is, if you're a data-oriented, facts matter person like myself, you are water in a desert. We live in a world of dis and misinformation. Yeah. And so anybody who can bring to any conversation the facts pleasantly, but with authority, and say, well, that's interesting. It's not exactly true. In fact, here are the sources. If you go back to the sources, these are the facts. And everybody can have their own opinion, but they're only one set of facts. Let's focus on the facts, or in the way you say it, data is greater than dogma. Yeah. And when we talk about Dan having merch, he ain't kidding, man. In fact, let me show you this. Take a look at that. Over at bonfire.com/store/data-over-dogma, you can get official Dan McClellan merch, including pure and utter nonsense, one of his catchphrases. The other one, all right, let's see it. And then my favorites, the data over dogma. Probably it shows best on one of these t-shirts. If I can, there you go. Data is greater than dogma. I mean, even the simple design I really appreciate, because again, I'm an art director or a creative director, and less is more, especially when you've got a very simple message there, which is, oh, I see the heavier type means that the word data actually has more weight and heft and meaning than dogma, which is a little bit thinner and wispy, and you can almost not see it in comparison to data. Oh, that's kind of a clever way of saying exactly what you're saying, which is data is greater than dogma.
Yeah.
Holy crap. I mean, and again, I just want to say, this is a PhD in biblical literature and linguistics who has merch, people. Are you kidding me? And the whole thing is, of course, people want this, because now it's a signifier that I am in the tribe of Dan. I'm not following him anywhere, because I think for myself. To be a member of the tribe of Dan means that I think for myself, and data is greater than dogma. And by the way, I've seen some of your videos where you've been humble in being corrected by some of those experts in subject matter fields that are adjacent to your own expertise. And I don't think of them as slapdowns. They're more calibrations, like, you're kind of there, but not quite. Here's some nuance. You openly share that stuff, which is part of your brand. You are authentic because you're not perfect. You come out and say that. And you are correctable or calibratable by those who bring the data and prove to you that perhaps you're a little bit off. And that Again, it's a tonic for those of us who are dying for a conversation that adults can actually have about any topic. Again, take Bible studies out of it, take linguistics out of it, take anything out of it. Whatever your topic of passion is, wouldn't you love to have a Dan McClellan that you could watch and learn from and be entertained by, but also edified by? Because that's part of your brand too. You educate, but you entertain as well, often at the cost of the people you're taking down, but they deserve it because they're peddling misinformation. I mean,
and what
I love it.
it's been a lot of fun. And one thing that I've tried to do, that's I'm glad it's clear, people can see that I'm willing to take correction, and I'm willing to make a video saying, hey everybody, I was wrong about this. This person directed me to the data that demonstrated I was wrong. And I think there are a lot of people out there that feel like in today's world, if you get corrected, you get dunked on, that it's over, that you can't come back from that. And I've noticed that's not the reality in the academic world. It's not the reality in my social circles. And so I've tried to approach content creation the same way, and hopefully model for other folks how you can continue to grow and progress as, in my case, a researcher, somebody learning about these things. I can't be a specialist in all this. And I am happy to say, hey, I got this wrong. Here's a great creator. They know more than me about this. They corrected me. And I get, there are one or two every time I do that, people who'd be like, I can't trust you anymore. Overwhelmingly, though, it is, wow, I would never expect that. You have impressed me even more than I was before. And I'd like to see a lot more of that kind of thing out there. But so many people are fighting for a team, and rather than trying to help everybody have a better understanding of the data and of the truth, that they end up retreating to the battle lines. And I also will critique all sides of the debates that I engage. And so sometimes I correct folks who are, what I would consider on my team, so to speak. And I say, you know what? And the phrase that I came up with to signal that that's what's going on is I say, hey, I appreciate and I support this creator's rhetorical goals. In other words, I see what they're trying to do. I agree with what they're trying to do. I'd like to see them achieve those goals. However, there's some issues with these claims, or that's not what the data support, or something like that. And that's not how I think a lot of people out there think you have to kind of pick a team and then stick with that team and try to ride them into success. But I am in some ways on playing both teams, and ultimately, I think the audience that I have attracted is a more devoted, a more dedicated audience, because I think that it's a deeper understanding, a deeper concern for these issues. If it's not just about, is this going to prove me right or wrong? Is this going to make me feel good about the social identities that are important to me? The folks who are in my audience are concerned for the data, and I think the world is going to be a better place the more folks like that we have centered in these discussions.
Well, and one of the things that you clearly do is you recognize some of the people you take down, they're pure charlatans. And anybody who's watching the video can see it's not that you're coming down on them like they're charlatans. It's just, you literally say, look, Emperor, no clothes on.
Yeah.
And the audience fills in the blank. You don't have to make them feel or say any invective against them or anything like that. You just point out they aren't wearing any clothes. And here's the empirical facts that prove it. But you also have a lot of people who, as you say, I support their rhetorical goals. Their heart is in the right place, which is another way of saying it. Their heart's in the right place. Their facts are a little bit off. And so I don't want to squash them. I don't want to cancel them, but I do want to provide them with a little bit of input that hopefully they'll find more constructive. And that whole conversation style is happening on TikTok. I got to say this again. People, this is happening on TikTok. This guy has a full-time gig for himself, working for himself, doing what he does in a very niche field on TikTok. And I also see you trying to move the audience off TikTok into your own hacienda, because the worst thing you could do is build a house on rented land. TikTok is rented land, but by the way, the Chinese own it. So any day now, Congress could shut down TikTok, and or the president could.
Mhm.
So you don't want to be stuck there. And actually, that's a good place for us to kind of end this episode, because next week I want to go more into what I would call the packaging of Dan McClellan. But for now, I want people to know how they can get in contact with you or engage with you. What's the best way for them to learn more about the burgeoning McClellan universe of goodness?
So I've got a handful of social media channels, and I go by the same handle across all of them. So that's at McClellan, and that's spelled McLellan. And that's a phonetic spelling of my last name when I lived in South America, because Spanish speakers are not incredibly fond of last names that begin with 4 consonants in a row. So that was a lot easier for folks to pronounce. And I got home, and turns out that's a very handy username. So on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube, you can find me at McClellan. I have a website, mcclellan.org, which right now is primarily playing host to some online classes that I'm teaching. And I've also got a Patreon for a lot of folks have reached out and said, how can I support you and make sure that you're able to continue producing this content? So I have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/McClellan.
Well, there you go. And let me tell you, if you are a person who remembers when History Channel actually did history and enjoyed it, or Discovery Channel did really interesting stuff back in the day, not so much now, but back in the day, you will love following Dan McClellan, whether you're religious or not, because for a word guy like me, the etymology I learned from your conversations is fascinating. The kid who grew up Lutheran in me loves the kind of democratized religion, let the people have a direct pathway to God, that type of thing. I love that too. And also the kind of 95 Theses on the door at Wittenberg kind of insurgency that you bring to the whole area of biblical scholarship totally works for me, if you know what I mean. And I think it works for a whole lot of other people as well. But anyway, that's Dan McClellan. He's going to be back next week. But I would like to remind you that the Nonfiction Brand podcast is brought to you by the book I wrote called Nonfiction Brand, Discover, Craft, and Communicate the completely true, completely you brand you already are. If you need to know exactly what that book is about, look at what Dan's doing. He's building a brand based on completely who he is, what he does, and how he does it. And he's doing it so brilliantly, I just had to have him on this podcast. And not only that, I have to have him back on next week. So be sure to tune in and subscribe to the Nonfiction Brand podcast, wherever you get fine podcasts for free. And you're talking about doing a podcast, or are you doing a podcast?
We've got 3 episodes in the can so far. A friend of mine and I decided this would be a great time to pull the trigger on a podcast, and it's going to be called the Data Over Dogma podcast. And basically,
wonder where that came from.
Well, yeah, it wasn't his idea. And it will be basically longer form stuff like what I do on my channel. It'll be about trying to make the academic study of the Bible and religion more accessible to the general public, and also combating misinformation. Just give people another outlet to be able to plug into these topics if they're interested in them, so they can see where the scholarship is right now rather than where it was 150 years ago, and where it can be freely accessible on the internet, which is mainly everything from 150 years ago.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that sounds fascinating. And so look for the Data Over Dogma podcast. Do you have a publication date in mind?
We're hoping about 2 weeks.
Okay, so we're recording this on March 14th. So let's just say April.
Hopefully before April, but yeah, somewhere around there.
Okay. Well, there you go. The Data Over Dogma podcast with Dan McClellan. And who's your co-host?
His name's Dan Beecher. He
So it's Dan and
currently,
Dan.
yep, Dan and Dan. We didn't want to make it the Dan show though. So and he currently has a podcast called Thank God I'm Atheist, where he does a lot of comedy related to atheism and religion. So it'll be fun.
Yeah. Well, at any rate, that's it for this week on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. Let me say that again. At any rate, that's it for this week on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. I am, of course, your host, DP Knudten, and he is
Dan McClellan.
And we'll be talking at you again next week. Bye-bye. Pause, pause, pause. Last week, we left our hero talking about, or I wanted to talk about, how that hero is actually packaging himself in memorable phrases and merch and ideas and even formats for your TikTok videos, so that people go, ooh, he just said, all right, let's see it. I'm in for a nice ride or a great little episode. Bring it, Dan. One, you may not know this because we haven't talked before, but the very first article written about personal branding by Tom Peters, the great business analyst, strategist, just brilliant guy, he wrote it about people need to build personal brands that package themselves the way that packaged goods have always packaged themselves. What's the difference between Kellogg's Corn Flakes and Post's version of it? They're the same flakes, made same way, but entirely different brands, to the point where people will only buy one but not the other. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because they are brand loyal, because they have brand expectations and are satisfied or delighted by them. Dan McClellan, when I see one of your TikTok videos come up, I watch it. I don't scroll past it because I know I'm a Dan brand guy. I buy Dan's brand via my viewership on TikTok because I know what I'm going to get, which is something interesting, something that could be a little bit controversial, but delivered with a whole lot of sugar on top. So it doesn't come down like a cancel culture, get rid of this person thing, but more of a, here's some information that might make their argument a little less spectacular, but a lot more honest. I'm there for that because of Dan, the brand. When did you start thinking about packaging yourself the way you have with your merch, with your upcoming podcast, with even your classes, which are available to people? And by the way, I want to make sure that we pump those or let people know about those. When did you decide to do that?
I think after only a few months of making these videos, I was uncomfortable seeing myself on camera initially. It was just the nerve it took to actually press record on that first video was just something I'd never been through before, and I wasn't happy with seeing myself on screen, but I could speak in kind of a monotone, classroom register, a voice like that pretty consistently, and that kind of became associated with my style of engaging these folks. And so after a few months, I thought about doing some things that were a little more performative, a little more set pieces where I'm doing a little more acting, and it just felt so forced and so unnatural. I didn't like the way any of these videos turned out, and I decided, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and I think that consistency will, in the long run, be better because I think people will know what to expect. And I kind of feel a little wooden in a lot of these videos. And one of the things I don't like is when I post a video on TikTok and on Instagram and some other places, it's got to pick the thumbnail. And frequently it's the very first frame of the video, which usually is me with kind of a deadpan look on my face. And I just don't like looking at that image. But that consistency, I think, is something that people latched onto because they knew I wasn't going to, use a lot of sensationalizing language, that I was going to treat people more or less the same, whether I thought they were just a little off or way off, or even if I agreed with them. And so I think between about 3 or 4 months in and now, I realized that I had kind of a way to present these data and my take on them in a way that people think comes across pretty authoritatively, but also dispassionately and also respectfully, even if it is somebody who's spreading misinformation that can be phenomenally harmful, sometimes even prejudicial and even bigoted. And I get a little rhetorical sometimes, and I think that entertains some folks. The the phrase that I see every now and then that my wife gets a kick out of is, if I get kind of really stern, or if I criticize somebody's rhetoric for being harmful or hateful or anything like that, they call it the Spicy Dan video. And so or Sassy Dan is the other one. So that doesn't come out a lot. I try to keep a pretty even keel, but I'll do like a little personal video every now and then where I'll tell a story or something like that, and then they say new Dan lore has dropped, and people get a kick out of that as well. So it was something that I think I developed as a means of ensuring that there wasn't a lot of turnover in my audience. I wanted people to be able to come back and know what they could expect. Maybe not with the issues I was addressing, but at least they knew what kind of presentation they were going to get. And it was more about trying to maintain that audience than it was about consciously developing a brand. But the feedback I got kind of showed me that's what was happening.
Well, what's interesting is you clearly understand that brand is not just a logo or a catchphrase or a color palette or a set topic list or anything like that. It's all that and who you are, what you do, and how you do it. That's kind of my litany on this podcast, is to say you have to understand truly who you are, what you do, and how you do it. And then I put my bumper sticker, or my merch would say, know who you are so you can be it. It's a little bit Yoda-y, but really it's no, you have to know who you are so you can be it. And that's what I see with you, Dan, whether you know it or not. And maybe you're the fact that you decided, oh, the performative Dan just isn't me, or I can have a sassy Dan here and there, but I don't want to go full sass because there's enough of that. We have entire channels on, cable that are nothing but that type of invective, yell at people crap that is all noise with no signal. And you don't want to be that, clearly.
No.
And by the way, I'm the person who buys you, meaning I'm the one who watches your video, and I can only speak for myself. And I will say, and I love that about you, Dan. You're not, I don't think you'll be insulted by me saying you're not a matinee idol. You're no Brad Pitt. No. Doesn't matter because your brain is Brad Pitt, and the data you bring to the conversation is Brad Pitt. And for people who are so sick of substanceless garbage, and here I am on a good day agnostic, on a really good day atheist. I'm still interested because I want to know. Because the worst thing for me is to just discount. I want to know, because convince me. If I'm wrong, convince me. And that's where I love your style and your brand. And by the way, I'm obviously not alone. I mean, I said last week you get probably average 50,000 views on a TikTok video. Is that where you've kind of done the math and come out with?
I haven't really done a ton of that math. Maybe I should, but I've always assumed I would need to get people to do it for me because I'm awful at math. But yeah, somewhere around there. If I get fewer than 30 or 40,000 views on a video, I'm a little bummed about that. And it kind of ebbs and flows. There are weeks when the average is higher, and then there are other weeks when it's lower. And there was a period for a while there. There's this urban legend about being shadow banned on TikTok, where
Right.
you've done something to upset the algorithm, or it's just your turn, and your views are in the tank for however long. And people have talked about a bunch of different ways they've found to resolve that. One friend told me to delete the app from my phone, then download it again and sign back in. And after probably a month of rarely breaking 10,000 views on my videos, I did that. The next day I think I had one that went to 1 million. So stuff like that happens from time to time, and it ebbs and flows. But yeah, I think that's probably about the average.
Wow. That's crazy. I mean, there's a guest on this podcast that's been on several times, Mark Schaefer, a marketing expert, really great guy. He has a new book out called Belonging to the Brand, which is all about building a community, that brands need to build communities. You're currently building a community, and maybe this community doesn't even know it exists. But I tell you, if I go walking down Madison, Wisconsin, State Street with a "Data is Greater Than Dogma" t-shirt on, I'm going to have people stop me. I know it, because Madison, Wisconsin is filled with university people who are studying linguistics. By the way, my daughter got her degree in linguistics. Crazy.
Very cool.
Anyway, but also Bible studies, you name it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. If I wore that t-shirt, it would be a signifier to a very small but passionate tribe that, oh, you think for yourself too. Love it. And that's what's cool, because that's part of your brand as well, which is you are not saying my way or the highway. You're saying data is the highway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to show you the data. You can choose to ride on that highway or not. You can still, by the way, if you want to just go pure dogma with your religious, spiritual experience, go ahead and do it. But you should be aware that this data exists. So please don't claim that this person's name in the Bible is actually derived from an old English word, or something like that. And you bring it, which again delights the viewers of Old School History Channel like me.
And I think it's I've thought about this idea of a community for some time, so I'm glad that you brought that up. One thing that I noticed is I've seen a lot of creators who are similarly trying to develop brands, and some of them have a lot more followers than I do, in the millions. And a lot of them will talk about the translatability of those followers too. And, they're trying to sell things, sell, short films that they've made, sell books that they've written, sell attendance at events and things like that. And I hear a lot that on social media, a lot of it doesn't translate very well. And that's not been my experience at all. The first time I created this merchandise and let people know, immediately there were sales. And not anything that's going to impress anybody who actually does that kind of stuff for a living, but for somebody who never thought they'd ever sell a shirt with a catchphrase of theirs on it, it kind of blew me away. But then with these online classes that I've been teaching, I had how many people? 1,400 people sign up for my first online class, that I was expecting maybe 100 if I was lucky. I had over 100 people. I was on the golf course. It was the day before my birthday. I'd been mulling over whether or not to launch this idea of doing an online course, and I was sitting there waiting for somebody they stuck me with to hit, who was taking forever. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to make this video and say, hey, I'm doing this online course. It's on the Israelite goddess Asherah. This is when it's going to be. By the time I got off the course, I already had a couple hundred people sign up.
Wow.
For the class. And so I was amazed that that community is actually, I think, a lot closer to what I'm talking about, and they're a lot more interested, and they want this to be a bigger part of their lives, in the sense that the data and their approach to these social issues sits a lot closer to the surface. And so I've been surprised by that, and I've been trying to think about, now that this community is developing, I want to be able to curate it in a way that allows these people to take advantage of all the opportunities there are out there to get to know other creators, to get to know some of the scholars that I know about that they may not be aware of, and kind of build bridges so these folks can have greater access to a lot of this stuff. So it's not just the me show. And there are some complexities that have arisen at the same time. For instance, I get tagged in videos. I couldn't do what I do without people directing me, showing me where these problematic claims are coming from. And I have noticed that I get tagged a lot more frequently in videos by creators who are women or who are otherwise members of minoritized or oppressed groups. And the last thing I want to do is be the guy who just is dunking on minoritized and marginalized groups all day long. So I'm in discussions with some friends right now about what to do about that kind of thing, because I don't want this community to turn into folks who enjoy seeing a certain type of people be corrected all the time. And so it's raised some interesting challenges for me as I move forward with this brand, but it's also been just an incredible experience. And I said it before, but I've met some incredible people, and even some people that I grew up being fans of, people who create other media, movies, TV shows, cartoons, and things like that, have reached out and have struck up conversations and friendships with me. And so it's been phenomenal in that regard. And my daughter makes fun of me to no end. If she's around, oh gosh, how old is she? 14-year-old. If she's around and somebody comes up and recognizes me, I will not hear the end of it. We were at Disneyland, and somebody came up to me and was like, "Hey, you're Dan McClellan." And he left, and my daughter was like, "Oh, Dad, was that one of your fans?" And just gave me a hard time about that. But these are great people. I enjoy when they come say hi. I enjoy hearing about what they enjoy about the channel. So it's been great.
Listeners, viewers, see what can happen when you share your voice and share your story, share your passions. The only things and I've said this a billion times, I'm going to say it a billion times more. The only thing you truly own is your experience, your story, and your voice. What is Dan doing? He's sharing his experience, his story, and his voice. And he's doing it in a way like the sweat you went through about minoritized communities and stuff like that. That's the most Dan thing ever. I mean, seriously, most people would go, "Oh, I see a spike when I pick on white women. I'm going to pick on white women every 5 videos or every, whatever." You going out of your way not to do that is absolutely true to who you are, what you do, and how you do it, which is why you, my friends, say it with me, are a nonfiction brand. I don't see much fictional about you. The classes Dan was talking about, I want to share this with you. You can find this over at McClellan.org, MAKLELAN.org. Dan has a number of classes that you can register for an upcoming online class. How do we get the biblical canon? Meaning, how did they decide what books to put in the Bible, which is a collection of separate books? Did you know that? Ooh, another Dan big buzzword, univocality. We'll talk about that in a minute. But he's also got other classes that you can go ahead and $25 do an hour and a half class about any of these subjects, which I guarantee you is going to be fascinating, because Dan is a brand who creates quality product. Never understand this about brands. It allows you to get rid of the cognitive dissonance of walking down the soda aisle and seeing 75 different colors and flavors. And I don't even have to look. I look for the red and the white, and I grab the Coca-Cola 12-pack and I walk out. I don't even have to think about it. Why? Because I'm bought the brand and I am brand loyal. Consequently, Dan McClellan. TikTok video. Oh, here's a new Dan. I'm going to watch that. Why? Because I'm buying the brand called Dan. This is how it works, people. And that's why I wanted to have Dan McClellan on here. So we're getting close to the end of this episode. I do want to make sure that we let people know exactly where they can see you, find you, engage with you. Your number one place is right on screen, www.mcclellan.org. But
That's
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. I was
No,
just going to say that's my new website where I'm hosting the online classes, and eventually that will be home base for me. I'm going to have scholarship I've published hosted there. I might have a blog at some point, probably links to my podcasts and things like that.
well, I don't know how you're going to build your community, but if there is like a bulletin board section, I fully expect that a bunch of people who are Dan followers who happen to be of a Hebrew or Jewish background, they might have their own section in there, or their own, Protestants might have agnostics and atheists over here, whatever. A community can have many different sub communities, all united under the same umbrella. And because you are so open and inviting to people of any religious or no religious background, I can only guess that you're probably going to host that kind of party when you build that community.
Hopefully, yeah. That's I think that people from all these different communities have fascinating backgrounds, experiences, stories of their own to tell, and so I love to hear from people from all these kinds of backgrounds. It's kind of funny. It's not what I expected, but about half of the comments people get, where people just want to tell me they appreciate what I'm doing, they either begin by saying, "I'm not even religious, but," or "I'm an atheist, but," or they will identify with some, even though I'm this, I'm still interested in what you're doing. I don't think of it as my content is intended for this specific religious outlook, but a lot of people feel like introducing their appreciation by qualifying it that way, which it's not a criticism. It's just to say that's not how I would think people would approach it. But yeah, I'm so happy that there are people from the whole spectrum who are interested in this. And I even have one of the reasons I think that I'm probably right in the sweet spot is I have just as many people who are part of my own religious tradition who hate me as who love me. And then just as many people who are atheists or agnostic who hate me and who love me. And so I think if I'm getting both from all sides, then I think I'm right in the sweet spot. I'm right where I need to be.
Yeah, that's what journalists always say. If I'm pissing off part of both far spectrums, then I'm doing my job, which is to be right in the middle. Again, if anybody wants to do that, kind of get a primer on Dan, the best way to do that is to check out his handle on TikTok at McClellan. There's a ton for you to binge on, man. 1,260 episodes. So what's your tempo? Do you come out with, is it every couple days or?
I try to do at least one a day. Lately, I've been doing two a day. TikTok has not been great for monetization, but they have a new program that monetizes for videos that are over 60 seconds. That is much better than the program they've had in the past. But at the same time, I have a bunch of friends who are content creators who've suggested that I get into YouTube Shorts as well. Evidently, that's something that's expected to grow quite a bit in the future, but that requires under 60 seconds. So my goal is just to do one over 60 seconds, one under 60 seconds every day for the foreseeable future.
Well, and the key there is consistency. As someone who is not consistent at all, I can testify to that. You will not build an audience if you're not consistent. I'm not consistent. Therefore, my audience, it's not what it should be, but that's okay because I'm doing what I can do given my own time, bandwidth, energy, etc. And that's the key when building any type of personal brand. Do what you can do. It doesn't have to be perfect. We talked a little bit about production values and stuff before we hit the record button on this. And I'm like, Dan, you don't need to change anything. You don't need to glam up. You don't need to do anything different because everything you do just screams of Dan and authenticity. And, let's face it, what's a different backdrop really going to do for you? I have
Yeah.
my polluted backdrop behind me on the live stream. If you're watching, you can tell a bunch of stuff about me, that I like guitars, I like music. I've got an old Wisconsin license plate up there with my last name, kind of phonetically spelled out, Knudten. So that's helpful. But the whole point is, do what you can do, because right now, if you're doing nothing, I guarantee you're getting nothing. But if you're doing what Dan's doing, you might have a whole new career. Because, by the way, Dan, who's your boss?
Right now it's my 3 little girls, but
Yeah, that's true.
my my official boss is myself. Yeah, I've since January I've been doing this full time.
Yeah. Well, good on you, man. And
Thank you.
again, if you want to get into one of Dan's classes or something like that, check out McClellan.org. You can see the URL on screen if you're watching the live stream, or his handle at MAKLELAN on TikTok and Twitter. And you've done the one smart thing of packaging a brand, which is rationalize your handles across all channels the same way I have at DP Knudten, which it helps to have a name that not a lot of people have. I will say that.
Yeah.
Well, at any rate, Dan, I want to thank you so much for being on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. I hope the audience members have, through my enthusiasm, gotten a flavor and an understanding of what Dan's about. And the whole thing is, he may not be your cup of tea, doesn't matter, but he's making his own tea. And there are a whole lot of people like me who are clamoring for it, because he's being 100% authentic, and he's building a platform for himself across other platforms, but he's already trying to bring those platforms over into his own owned land in terms of websites, classes, etc. Smart. I'm just saying, very smart. As always, the Nonfiction Brand podcast is brought to you by the book I wrote, Nonfiction Brand, Discover, Craft, and Communicate the completely true, completely you brand you already are. That's available over at the House of Bezos. Just look for Nonfiction Brand Knudten, Knudten, and you'll be able to find it. You'll be able to find it, buy it, and let me know, and I will be delighted forever. What is the name of your merch? Let's let people know about your merch spot. It's bonfire.com/
The store, it should be data-over-dogma. And then I also have a link tree where you can find all the links to. I have a couple of different stores, one there and then one on Teespring as well.
Yeah, there you go. Bonfire.com/ store/data-over-dogma/. And boy, I got to get me one of those data greater than dogma hoodies. Oh man, way too cool. At any rate, Dan, thank you so much for being on. A real delight. And I want to let you know that you are number 2 of a new sub-series of the Nonfiction Brand podcast that I'm calling the Tick Talk sessions, where I have people just like Dan on, so that I can really talk to interesting people about all this stuff. And hi, David Bauman, who I went to college with. He's on the live. He's watching on Facebook Live. Hi, David. Any rate, by the way, David, check out Dan McClellan on TikTok et al. That's it for this week on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. I am, of course, your host, DP Knudten, and he is
Dan McClellan.
And I'll be talking at you next week. Bye-bye.